We're going to do a session, it's not going to be too long, we're going to have a look at the quick quote system. Quick quotes is an area where buyers in the public sector can purchase goods, services, works, but of a smaller value. And I don't know if anyone was here when Fiona Conte was doing her presentation for the Aberdeenshire City and Highland. And she gave some figures out, and it was actually quite revealing the actual amount of value, if you like, in public sector purchasing that goes through this route for small businesses. Um, I run a small business, so we do training for the SDP for many years now, but we also provide consultancy, tendering advice. So quite a large amount of our work comes through the quick quotes route as well. So it's definitely an area, if you're a bit smaller perhaps, also if you're maybe new to procurement, it's a very interesting route, I think, a very good route to market. So we're going to cover some of the highlights, hopefully give you a few tips as we go along. So the quick quote, as I say, it is very much part of the regulated buying system for the public sector in Scotland. There are similar approaches as well in other parts of the UK. The most important part to know about quick quotes is that it's by invitation only. So it's very much a system where you have to wait until a buyer approaches you for a quick quote. So we'll come back to that shortly and sort of discuss how we make sure that we're spotted. Things have been changing a little bit with quick quotes, so they're very much organised around the value of a tender, is the first thing. So if you're supplying goods or supplying services, for example, anything £50,000 in value and below will be procured through a quick quote. If you're involved in construction or maybe larger works, then it's a much higher figure. The threshold is £2 million and below. So you can already start to see in the construction type area, there's going to be some quite significant pieces of work. And the deal there is it's not going to be published in PCS at the stage of buying. And that's the issue for us as bidders and suppliers. One of the changes really that's been happening over the last couple of years, I would say, is that the internal rules for some of the buyers, in particular the councils, are starting to change. It's linking with something called community wealth building, where there's a lot of pressure, say here, Aberdeenshire and City, to make sure that as much work goes into the local businesses as possible. So some of the councils, and if you get a chance, I would ask Fiona and her team about this. What they're doing is reserving places, if you like, on a quick quote list for the local businesses. So typically the process is there's a requirement, say for example it's training, the documents are put together and then the buyer will look on Public Contract Scotland and say, well, typically 5, 6, 7 people that they will then invite to quote. Some internal rules will say 2, 3, 4 of these should be SMEs or social enterprises, third sector from the local area. So great news if you're from the local area, but not so great news if you're not. So it's very important to speak to the local authorities, the councils that you think that you would like to get quick quotes from, and find out a little bit about this favouring local SMEs approach. So, as I say, it's by invitation only, and Public Contract Scotland is the main route for all the buyers to do all the administration of the quick quotes. I'll show you shortly what it looks like from the buyer's side, but they'll use PCS to put their quick quote documentation together, and they'll also use PCS to then go and search for suitable companies. So I think you've probably had the message quite a few times today. Get yourself registered, and we're going to look just now at where you fill in your supplier finder profile for that. Registering, if you haven't done it, is absolutely straightforward. Just to confirm again, it's free of charge. But one of the important messages, and I think it's been mentioned already before today, if you're in an organisation and possibly maybe a few people are all sort of registering separately, You need to be aware that when it comes to the quick quote, the buyer is going to send that request to a named person in your organization. And if you've got quite a few people registered, it's very frustrating for the buyers because basically they don't know which email to send it to. So the whole registration process, as I say, the forms are very straightforward, but it's a good idea even just to ask around everybody else in your organisation who's registered. Annoyingly, I don't know why this is, but as suppliers, we're not able to check that ourselves. Um, find out who's registered and make sure that you've got a sort of tenders at or information at as the main registration. So the first part that you'll fill in, if you haven't registered before, this is obviously where you do set up your email address, all the basic information on the company. You then quickly go through to what we call the alert profile. And this is important because the categories that you choose for your alerts can be a way that the buyers might do some searching to find you for quick quotes. The alert categories are typically a little bit frustrating sometimes. I know in certain areas there may be not so much choice about which to use. And the other challenge is how many categories you sign up for. Because if you put the alerts in, that's where you're going to start getting notifications of any contract notices, contract awards. And I'm sure if you're like me, you'll get them. I think they come through every day, but it's quite a lot to trek through. Um, what I've started to do is quite often if a contract notice is published, there's a tab on the contract notice that says, I think it's codes or coding, and that shows you what the buyers use to code that notice, and that can be quite a good way to build up a feel for what the categories are that you need to choose. Okay, you can actually go in on when you're setting up PCS, or you can go back in and out and change these at any time. You can do a browse, which will take you through that kind of tree structure, but I would tend to use the search and just put in some keywords and make sure that the alert terms come up and through. Once your alerts are all set up, the next stage is this supplier finder profile. And this is the absolutely critical one. A, you need to fill it in, and B, you also need to publish it. And at the very top of the form, as you're filling it in, is a publish, don't publish button. So to be honest, I just publish immediately, even if I've only written a few words in it. I've worked with some clients and they were bowling along, quite happy. They'd put a lot of work into their profile, but it turned out they actually hadn't published it, so they were literally invisible. So make sure that's done first. If you're here today and you've already done a supplier finder profile, it's quite easy to then go back in, and I would recommend you go back and check it. So when you log into PCS, under your supplier interest area, there's a box just towards the sort of bottom left of that screen, which gives you your main profile, your alerts, but also the supplier finder profile. So it's a good chance to go back in and make sure, A, that it's published, and B, that it's properly completed. The form itself is pretty straightforward. Again, you've got some details to fill in basic on the company. This is the important bit, so there'll be an email address associated with your supplier finder profile. That's the one that absolutely must have this tenders at. A, to cover for holidays, but also just to make the buyer aware that this is the one that they should be doing. I was doing some training last month with a company in Edinburgh, and I have a buyer's account. So I said, oh, I can see how many people are registered from whatever the company name was. And it was a list of 12, and 6 of them had left the company and just weren't there anymore. So I think, and it's worth asking PCS about this, because we can't see it, it's maybe a good thing to contact the help desk at PCS if you're worried that you might have some sort of redundant entries. So basic company information, you're given a chance to add some regions. And this isn't the region where you're based necessarily, but it is the areas where you think you can provide your services or deliver the goods. So again, be a bit careful. It's a bit tempting maybe just to add all the regions in, but you might get sent a quick quote and then you go back and say, oh, well, we don't work in Aberdeenshire, or we don't do the borders. So try and keep it to the areas that you really want to cover. Most of the rest of the profile is all about your services and what your organisation can offer. So that clearly is the most important bit when it comes to filling it in. At the start of the section, you're given an opportunity to choose keywords. And those can be phrases, they don't necessarily have to be single words. I've seen some really bad keywords where people have put in things like, I don't know, high quality service or great value for money. That's not the keywords that the buyer's going to be using to be searching. So try and get your kind of buyer's head on, if you like, and make sure that you choose some nice, clean, clear keywords that really properly describe the service that you're going to be offering. The next part then is something which I think it's about 4,000 characters that you're allowed. And that's quite, it ends up being like almost half a page to describe what your company's offering. And again, that's very important that that's a nice clear description. And I'll show you later why that's the case when you see them published. But from the buyer's point of view, they're not looking for a big deal history of your organisation necessarily. They want to know, have you worked, so your experience? Have you got previous examples working for public sector for sure? If you can name some clients. Commercial is important too. What the services are that you offer or the goods. So sometimes you can't do a great deal of formatting, but you can do a kind of bullet point list and just make it nice and apparent, if you like, all the different areas that you can cover. There's also a good opportunity, particularly in the public sector. There might be things to do with certifications, so anything to do with, say, quality management. We do a lot of work with construction companies, so it's things like CHAS, construction line, any of those kind of health and safety areas. Doing work with someone this week that's actually got investors and volunteers, which I didn't know existed. Investors and people. So anything like that that kind of emphasizes your credibility, I think is really useful. And try, when you're writing the piece, try to keep it to what we call evidence. So avoid the we're, person-centered, fantastic things. You know, it's fine in a brochure, it's maybe good in your website and so on, but keep it quite neutral, evidence-based on your profile. There is an opportunity now as well, particularly in most of the tenders we're all going for, things like sustainability, so environment, ethical trading, community benefits, those kind of areas are scoring more and more. So in my supplier finder profile now, I've started to add in some elements for that too. So I've started to describe maybe some of the community benefits that we're delivering. I've mentioned that we've got an environmental policy, that we're, trying to start measuring our carbon. So again, that's another aspect that a public sector buyer could well be interested in. Just to let you see from the view of the completed profile, you do have quite a lot of words that you can use to fill in. This one here, I think, was quite nice. It was interesting. It was the first social enterprise childcare service in Ayrshire, so something like that for a public buyer could be quite interesting. They've mentioned about the community benefits. They're quite clear what the services are that they cover. And this is obviously the view when we see it in our own profiles, but when the public sector buyer is reading this, this is where it's important that things are just structure things maybe with some headings. So you can use capital letters. There's no other formatting allowed, but it helps to kind of break up the text. I do quite a lot of searching. So again, as a buyer, looking at various areas, and I am constantly surprised at the number of supplier finder profiles that are there with literally just a one-liner, and it's even from quite, what I would say, decent sized companies, or it could be that someone's registered and they've just quickly, put something in. They're not the main representative. But as a buyer, for me, that's absolutely useless. So it's not, if I was going to give a quick quote, I'm then having to look at the website, which is not ideal either. So it's another good reason to go back and check your own profiles just now. So you can't look up quick quotes that are being offered, if you like. It's just to say that will only come to you individually, but you can use PCS to search for quick quote awards, and these are published. And there's a funny little, when they're published, there's a little white box with a green cross that tells you it's a quick quote. So that again could be quite interesting if you're starting to research a certain market, maybe looking at a certain customer. Don't know if any of you use the search for buyer um, function on PCS. You could actually look through, say, again, Aberdeen City Council, search for buyer, and there'll be a list of contract awards, and you can run down those and see what quick quotes have come out. So if you are lucky enough to get a quick quote, you need to know how to respond. You have to be a little bit careful because the quick quote request will come out to us as a supplier, but it looks very similar to some of the notices where it just says, here's so and so's published, here's a contract notice. It will have quote, invitation to quote in the title, but I'll confess, I think I've missed at least one over the past years where we actually just skimmed through and didn't notice it in our email box. But as soon as you get it, you open up the email and it'll take you into your supplier interest area, and you'll be invited to either accept the quote or decline the quote. You kind of have to accept the quote in order to get the documents. So it's fine to do that and then go back and decline it afterwards. And at that point, the buyer may come back and ask you, what I think is a standard response. Why did you decline? And it's absolutely all right to say it's, we're too busy, or it's not exactly in our field, or so on. Otherwise, you're really just responding in the same way that you would to any other contract notice. So you click on the link, it'll open up the quick quote, and you'll have the usual, the summary with the deadlines, a tab with all the documents, a tab with the coding, which I've mentioned earlier, and there'll be a Q&A. So very, very similar to a tendering process. You'll still have the chance to ask questions and get the answers back through. Just to say a little bit before we go on to the postbox response and sending them back, the quick quotes process, because it's used for potentially quite large contracts, particularly say in the construction area, you have to be a little bit prepared for everything. So sometimes a quick quote, you literally have to just send in your own kind of method statement. It's a few pages, it's very straightforward, there's no single procurement document. State your price, and that's absolutely fine. But certainly in our experience, we bid for work with Business Gateway quite often, and that actually is a quick quote, but to be honest, it's as demanding as a full tender. And once you get into the construction area, obviously you're going to expect again quite a bit. It's not quick necessarily. The other thing is the time scales for quick quotes are absolutely up to the buyer to decide. So I've seen some where it's as short as a week. That's quite unusual. Others maybe are more in line with a normal tender. And it really has to be proportionate. And if you feel that you've been asked to respond to a quick quote and it's too short a deadline, I would definitely always get back and ask the buyer if they could extend. So once you've put your documents together, it's like any other contract response through PCS. You'll assemble your documents and then you're uploading them through the postbox system. So reasonably straightforward in the process, but you just have to remember to make sure that all your documents are included. So I would always have a checklist for that. And just to say, by the way, there's all of these processes are covered through the courses in the Supplier Development Programme. So quick quotes, I think on it separately, Gillian, but just the whole sort of tender processing, and we'd cover all of those as well. Okay, I'm just very quickly to finish off going to show you from the buyer's point of view what PCS looks like in the quick quote process. So in their buyer's area, they'll have a tab which is called, it'll be under quick quotes, but then it's called search for suppliers. And they have a number of options how to do that. So the first option is a category search. So the category are those elements that we've uploaded in our alerts. So I think we've kind of suffered from this one as well. We didn't put procurement as one of our categories because we felt that was the buyer side. And we got a phone call from Falkirk Council saying, well, we're searching for you in PCS and you're not on. But we just hadn't chosen that category in particular. But it was quite interesting. It's a highlight. You think, gosh, what else have we missed? You know, where someone's searching under that route. The middle box allows the buyer to search by details. So, for example, if you're speaking to people today and they've got your business card, they could actually go in and say, right, I've got a quick quote, I'm going to send it to, and they've got your business card, and they'll pick you up either by your name or more commonly your company name. So again, for some buyers, may actually go down that route as well. The third option is the supplier finder database. And I think more typically, that's where a buyer, say they've got 5 or 6 people to choose, they'll tend to go with people they've worked with already, people that they've maybe met through events like this, that are new to the market, people that bid and maybe came second or third, didn't quite win. But it might be a sector or a requirement where they actually don't know who's out there. So the database is their way to then search through and find out who's in the market, maybe who's local. So if they've got this internal rule, for example, that it has to be a local company. So that's where all of us, if you like, get a chance to be picked up in that database search. If they search by category, I think it's quite challenging. I'm not sure really. There might be some categories that are very specialist, so the buyers would put the category in and it's quite a small list. But in many of these searches, the buyer's really presented with a massive big list of companies. And common to a lot of these systems, it starts off, you know, A to Z, or the numbers are first, or so on. So if you're Zodiac Security, for example, you're going to be right down at the bottom of some of these lists. Um, Okay, but the category search, I suspect, maybe not used quite so often. But if they were doing the supplier finder search, then at some point they're going to end up with a list of people who meet the keyword criteria that they've put in. They've maybe restricted it as well to a certain geographical area. You can see already, if say there were 30 results, I mean, some of them might be even more than that. From the buyer's point of view, the first thing they see are the keywords. So that emphasizes why those are so important. But then your description only has a kind of teaser text of maybe a couple of lines. So starting off your description with a, I don't know, some sort of back in the history days, da 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 da, is not the best. You need to have something quite clear in the first few lines of your profile. And again, as you can see here as well, it starts off with the companies that have got the numbers in their name, and it will move on through A to Z. And then the buyer will have to go through various pages worth of results to then find the buyer, who they're looking for. And I think to us, I mean, me particularly, I think that's the clue for us really as suppliers, is it's quite random then for the buyer to come across people. So anything you can do to raise your profile, to contact some of the buyers directly, is going to make a big difference. So in terms of that, aside from keeping your profile up to date, doing this check, get in touch with PCS, do a bit of sort of spring cleaning if you like, find out if you've got any redundant entries under your company name, get your generic contact. Probably most of the rest of it is back down to good old sort of business development, to be absolutely honest. I would be using the search for buyer search on PCS if there's somebody in particular that I know I want to work with. I use the contracts register search on PCS a lot. So that will take you into a list of contracts that have already been awarded. But what's interesting is in each entry, there's an email of a person within the buyer organisation. And that person, it's not going to be a procurement person, it's going to be someone who's actually managing that contract. So to me, that's the person that I'm going to be contacting directly and saying, I'm here, we provide a similar service, can you consider us for quick quotes? And although we're all being told not to contact buyers during a tender, it's absolutely okay to contact them in respect of the quick quotes and helping to sort of raise your profile. And the more specialist your service is, the more the doors will be open, I would say, because the buyers absolutely struggle to find good suppliers. Meet the buyer events, obviously. We're here today. I think the next one will be June, is it, for the national And we've got some regional. So yes, Supplier Development Programme page has all the Meet the Buyer events. I've been to a few where it's a Meet the Buyer, but it's in connection with a big opportunity, particularly some of the construction type activities. There was one in Falkirk, I think, where it was a big regeneration, and they weren't just looking for construction people, they wanted catering, providers of, the portaloos and everything. So it was a massive big gathering. So any opportunity for those Meet the Buyers, an SDP will have those already published. Okay, so yeah, and obviously anybody here, if you're get the chance to go around the stall, still just ask them directly about quick quotes and what their process is. Okay, thanks very much. I'm happy to take questions on the SDP stand a bit later on as well. Thank you.